On August 5, 2019, 13-year-old Cristina Pangalangan of Colleton County, who has cerebral palsy, is placed in a car outside the home of her mother's boyfriend, Larry King. She is left there for hours while King and her mother, Rita Pangalangan, go in and out of the house, only once opening the car door to check on Cristina. High temperatures reached 89 degrees that day. Nearly 6 hours later, Cristina is found dead. King and Rita Pangalangan are charged with murder, criminal conspiracy, and inflicting great bodily injury on a child. They are tried in August 2023 at the Colleton County Courthouse. 14th Circuit Solicitor Duffie Stone prosecutes the defendants. This is his closing argument.
I'm going to talk to you very briefly today about what we know, what evidence we've heard, what testimony you've heard, what you've seen, from everything on the video, to the chemical analysis, to the experts, to everything. What I want to talk about right now is just what we know. There's a question about it. We start with Cristina. Cristina was a child born with cerebral palsy. She could not walk, she couldn't grasp, she couldn't talk. And she could show emotion, because you've seen, for instance, this photograph, you can see the child can show emotions, and that's going to be relevant in a few minutes to what I'm talking about. But Cristina was not like other girls. She was totally dependent, 100%, on other people. She was dependent on everybody, for somebody to take care of her, somebody to give her food, somebody to give her water, somebody to keep her safe. Cristina was totally dependent on Rita to do all of those things. Every day. Every day. Not just on Rita's good days. Not just on days when Rita is posing for photographs. Not just when Rita is sober. But even on the days when Rita chooses to go hang out with Larry and get high on meth. Cristina was dependent upon her then too. Wholly dependent on her. Even when Rita was high. Now, you heard testimony from defense witnesses, and they came in and they told you what they knew. One had not really had much contact with her for 18 years except through Facebook. Her daughter came in and said what a daughter should say. She's a good mother. But neither one of them knew about the meth. Neither one of them. And we know on that day, where none of those witnesses were, they didn't know what was going on. On that day, on that weekend, on that Friday, that Saturday, the Sunday, and the Monday, we know that they were on a meth bender. We know it because we took their blood. You know it because you had a chemist, 1, 2, 3 chemists come in and tell you that. Methamphetamine in both Rita's blood as well as Larry, and all well over the limit that would make them high. And if you didn't, for whatever reason, think that was enough, Larry told you the same thing. He didn't want to, but he did. He had slept in 3 days. He and Rita had been doing meth. She liked to put it in her coffee. And he didn't want to tell us, but he did. And we know that. And that little girl was dependent upon Rita to take care of her, to keep her safe. Rita was high. And neither her daughter knew about that, nor the other lady that testified. But we know that. Without any shadow of a doubt. What else do we know? We know that Larry had first of all, we know that in the middle of that bender, Rita and Larry get in Larry's truck and go get the child and bring her into that environment where they're getting high. And they go in and they stay the night. And we now know that Larry had a security system, a very good one, a very sensitive one, a one that would pick up any type of motion going in and around the car. And we know, because there's direct testimony, that there was no motion around that car at all until 11:15. And 11:15, the motion we saw with these two going to the car. So what do we know? The car's not on. There's no air conditioning. Nobody's been near that car. Unless the angle was that they parked the night before and left the car running with the air conditioner on. But nobody said that. Larry said, oh, the car was running when we put the child in. Because Larry needed to say the car was running when we put the child in. Not because it was true. And you know, because you could see it, the car wasn't on. There wasn't air conditioning on. And they left the child in that car for 1 hour and 15 minutes before there was any more motion, before there was any more interaction with that car. We know because I'll put these back around. We know that as of about 11 o'clock is when, 12 o'clock is when the heat starts spiking inside a car. We know that because we actually brought an expert, Dr. Grunstein, to come testify to you about what happens inside a car when it's that hot outside in August in South Carolina. And this spike starts right after 12 o'clock. Until then, it's about the same as the car. So you're talking about 90, 80, 90 degrees to begin with. And by the time they go back to that car at 12:15, Larry doesn't go back to the car, but Rita does. We're already over here. The heat inside that car is now approaching 100 degrees. And now we're going to go back to this. And first of all, let me just stop us here. If all they had done is put that child in a hot car in the middle of August and left that child there for 1 hour and 15 minutes, in some way, miraculously, somebody had come along and gotten that child out, I submit to you they still would have inflicted serious bodily injury on that child, because the definition of serious bodily injury is a likelihood that it could cause serious impairment or death. And I don't think there's any question at all what the end of this result was. If we stop there, you have that. And did they do it together? Absolutely. Even Larry testified to that. We did everything together. Put them in the car together, and you see that? We left them in the car together. And there's your conspiracy. That's not all we have. Unfortunately, it didn't stop there. Unfortunately, the child was not rescued from the people that she depended on or anybody else. So now we're at 12:15. Child has been in the 12:30, excuse me. The child's been now in the car for 1 hour and 15 minutes. No air, no wind, not even a cracked window. Now, Rita goes back to the car. And she opens both doors. She opened both doors with air conditions on. She's opening both doors. Maybe let a little wind out of there, which is the only considerate thing she did in this entire event. Do you know what else she did? She looked inside the car. And now I want you to think about something. Go back to Christina's picture. This child can show emotion. She can't scream and she can't talk, but she can show emotion. You can see it in her face. So what did she look like when her mother was looking at her after being left in a hot car by herself with no wind in 100-degree heat for 1 hour and 15 minutes? What do you see when she looks in the car? The child's got to be going, help. That's not a happy face in that car. After 1 hour and 15 minutes in this heat in that car by herself, a child who's totally dependent on others, she's begging for help. So what does Rita do? She closes the door. She goes back inside. with Larry. The first time, she and Larry put the child in the car. And they go inside, as Larry says, to make up, to have sex. So while they're inside having sex, the child is out in the car. She comes back out, looks at the child. The child at this point had to be begging. She closes the door and goes back inside to spend some more time with Larry. Which, by the way, would be the last time anyone approaches that car to look after that girl until 3 o'clock in the afternoon. They go back on the porch. No, not this one, go back. They go back on the porch about an hour and a half later. They don't actually walk out into the car. They don't go see the car. It's been another hour and 15 minutes. They go back out on the porch. They hang out on the porch. And now it's 2 o'clock, 2:02 to be exact. Neither one of them approached the car. The girl is still in there. What's going on inside the car now? Now it's 2 o'clock, 11, 12, 1, 2. Take a look at the temperature inside that car now. It's now reached that maximum temperature. It's getting close to that maximum temperature. It's well over 110, 115 degrees inside that car. And they come back out. And do they go check on it? No. Well, they did. They hug. They kiss. And then they go back inside for another hour and 15 minutes. The child is literally cooking to death in the car. And they're going back inside again. And they stayed there for an hour and 15 minutes. And then they come back out. This time, Rita actually walks to the car. This is when she finds that the keys are locked in the car. But pay very close attention to this. Where does Rita walk when she walks out of the house? It's now 3 o'clock. The child has been in the car since 11:15. The heat is now at well over 118 degrees. Inside the car, it feels like 135 degrees. You've heard testimony from experts giving you that testimony. And where does Rita go? Does she go to the side that the child's on to check on her? Is she trying to get the car to drive? No. What's she doing? She's going to get her cigarettes. In the back seat of the car, where they put this child at 11:15, there was a bag in the back seat. Right beside the child. And inside that bag was this. A gun.
Renewed objection.
And not only 401, 403.
Never seen.
And not only was it a gun, it was a loaded gun. Again, in a bag, right beside this child. And right there, also, are the cigarettes. She walks back out to the car at 3 o'clock. She's still not going to check on the child. She's not even going to drive away. She's going to get some cigarettes. And she finds that the car is locked. So what do? The car is locked. The child has been in the car since 11:15. It is now 3 o'clock in the afternoon. It is well over 118 degrees inside that car. It feels like 135. They have found that the keys are locked in the car. So what do? Naturally, they break the window. No, they don't. Rita says it's too expensive, so I'll break the window.
Objection to your statement. It's not facts enough.
Let's go. Let's go.
Your Honor, it was sustained to your testimony.
Thank you, Your Honor. Break the window? Now. What do? They hang out. They get on the swing and start swinging back and forth. It's now 3:19. 19 minutes after they found that the child is locked in the car with the keys. 19 minutes after we know for a fact it's already 118 degrees inside the car. And what are they doing? They're swinging. Is there any sense of urgency here? Is at any point in time they're going to say, hey, we need to take care of this child? No, we're swinging. And then what do? They eventually go to Larry's truck, which is parked out back. And now what do? It is now 39 minutes later. It is 3:39. They're still at the house. And they're kissing. They're not taking care of the child. What are you thinking about the child? They're thinking about themselves. So then let's go get a spare key. This is where the child is. And this is where Larry and Rita go to go get a spare key. Which is why they don't get back for 52 minutes. The child's locked in the car at 3 o'clock. They don't get back until 4. Any sense of urgency there? Any concern for the health and welfare of that child? Did the child even cross their minds? Because they were high. And they were interested in each other. And they were interested in kissing and hugging and spending time with each other and having sex. Even the doctor talked about an increased libido as a result of being high on that. And you see it in all of these pictures, because that's what they're concerned about. Now the council concerned for that child. 52 minutes. And then when they get back, they arrive 4:40. They get back to the house at 4:40. They're in Larry's truck. Thank goodness they've got a key. They can come rescue this child now. When did they get out of the truck? They don't open the door until 4:44. They sit in the truck for 4 minutes and talking and hanging out. Again, no concern for the child whatsoever. They're just hanging out in the truck. And eventually they get out. And they approach the car. And when they do, neither one of them are sober enough to even figure out how to unlock the car. Larry testified, I'm pushing the unlock button, but it's not unlocking. It's because he's locking it. He's locking it, he's unlocking, he's pushing it. And the testimony that you heard from Captain Chapman, but also from even Larry, I'm pushing the button and the lights come on when I'm pushing the button, but it's not unlocking. Now what you know is that when it's hit the emergency flasher, it's going flash, flash, flash. But at the end, when it goes blink, 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 that's hitting the lock and the unlock. I think it's once for lock, maybe 2 for unlock, I don't know. But the point is that you can't do that if the car's on. But we already knew that. You know how you know that? Because otherwise, if you spend 5 hours in a car in South Carolina driving around with your air conditioning on, we would all be dead. Clearly the air condition wasn't on. They may have thought it was, but clearly the car wasn't on and the air condition wasn't on. Now why do we know that? Because the child cooked to death. That's why. And also something else. Not one piece of testimony, not one person, not one came in here and said, I turned the car on. Larry said, the car was already on when I put the child in there. Although we know that's not true. Did Larry say he turned the car on? Nope. What did Larry say? I turned the car off. And we'll get to that in just a second. So they get the child and they pull the child out of the car. What happens then? Oh, and by the way, one other thing too. They haven't gotten the child out of the car yet. They can't figure out how to unlock it. It's now 4:47 and they're back to hugging again. That's not a distraught picture because they haven't pulled the child out of the car yet. They're still hugging and kissing. They still haven't focused on the child. And eventually they would get the child out of the car. What happens after that? They pull the child up. State's Exhibit 5. They pull the child out. Larry calls 911. What does Rita do? She leaves. When Hallie Godley gets there, Rita's nowhere to be found. She's inside the house. And that's particularly relevant for what we're going to talk about in just a second. He calls 911, but before the police get there, what does he say? I reached in and turned the car off. Why would you do that? Think about it a minute. They just pulled a dead child out of the car. He's calling 911. Police are on the way. Why does he reach in the car and turn it off? You don't want to waste gas? What? Why would you in any way, shape, or form stop what you're doing when there is a dead child on the ground to go reach in and turn the car off? You wouldn't. There's no reason for that. But there's a real good reason to reach inside that car and turn it on. And what you heard Captain Chapman say today is, when we got there, the car was running. The air conditioner was working just like it was working 3 days ago. There was no compression issue with that car, compressor issue with that car. It works. And the air was on, the car was running, but it wasn't cold inside. The air conditioner was blowing cold, but it wasn't cold inside that car. Why? Because Larry had just turned it on right before the police got there. Why? Because he knew he just murdered that child. That's why. And by the way, what did Rita say when they finally went and got Rita out of the house and brought her out? What did she say? Hallie Godley testified to this Monday. That was the very first witness. She said, I brought Rita out, and Rita said, we put the child in the car. I went inside to get cigarettes. I came back out, and the car was locked. That was her description of what happened. Even Rita didn't say the car was on with the air conditioning running. Because that would have been the very first thing out of her mouth if that was true. Instead it was, oh, this was just a matter of seconds. I went inside to get cigarettes, I came back out, and the car was locked. That was it. Because Rita didn't know they had the camera system. Thank goodness they did. Because we wouldn't know any better. But we do know better. The child wasn't just in the car for a split second. The child was in the car for 5 hours and 42 minutes. It's an awful long time. Everything I have told you so far, you know. Well, yes, you guys, you still know. Nothing different about that. So you know what happened. The question is, before you now, is what do you call it? What is it? You know what it is. You've seen it. You've heard the testimony. The question is, what do you call it? Putting that child in the car to begin with, and leaving that child in the car, exposing that child to potential death, was the infliction of injury to that child rose to the level of substantial death. The first charge, they did that early. The conspiracy, they did everything together. What about the rest of the 4 hours that the child was in the car? What about the pain and the suffering that that child had to endure before they died, as Dr. Tallis testified to you? We expect that 105 degrees that people start dying. We've all had fevers. You know how bad you feel at 100-degree fever or 101. The child's inside temperature was 110. And Dr. Tallis said, I'll be honest with you, I think at 104, 105, the brain stops working, the organs start shutting down. She vomited into her throat. She defecated in her diaper. You see that in the crime scene pictures. Her whole body just stopped working. And I'll be honest with you, I wouldn't expect her to last more than an hour in those conditions. And they put her in those conditions for 5 hours and 46 minutes. So we know about the infliction of serious bodily injury. We know about the conspiracy. What do you call the child's death? Well, murder is the unlawful killing of another with malice. What does that mean? Unlawful killing of another, that's pretty easy, but what's malice? Well, there are two ways to show malice. One is expressed. If you walk up to somebody and say, I hate you, I'm going to kill you, I don't care if you live or die, you shoot them in the head, that's expressed malice. This case is about implied malice. And what is implied malice? Implied malice is that you can take from the facts and circumstances of the case, what you have seen, what you have heard, what you know about this case, that someone was so extremely reckless that they had a wanton disregard for human life. They may not even have direct ill feelings toward that one individual, but their attitude, their actions, all of the things that they chose to do, all the way they chose to act, all led back to a conscious disregard for the lives of others, and in this case, the other person was Cristina, a child totally dependent on them for safety. A wickedness, a depravity, malicious. And we know what malicious is. And so I ask you, as you go back and look at all this, at what point in time in any of this did either one of these two people show an ounce of compassion or care or concern for Cristina's life? If they had walked up to her and shot her, she wouldn't have suffered the pain that she suffered in this case.
Objection, Your Honor. Matter of law, appropriate time.
Objection's over.
Thank you, Your Honor. I have almost 42 minutes of suffering. You see the blisters on her legs, the burn marks from her coming in contact with other parts of that car that was also rose to the level of 118 degrees or 135. She was burned externally and internally. What do you call it? Well, I'll tell you that if you're sitting around talking to your family members or your friends and you're describing this situation to them, you may not talk in terms of legal anything. But I think a good way to describe this is torture. Tell us torture. Before Larry and Rita? After Larry and Rita? Not the Larry and Rita that these other people didn't know. The Larry and Rita that were high on meth. And these bruises and these blisters that Dr. Vitalis described, it's torture. And you don't accidentally torture somebody. You treat them with such a lack of disregard for their human life that they die because of the torture. And that's what happened in this case. In the real world, when you're talking to your fans or family, and you're describing all this, you might use the word torture. But in this courtroom today, I ask you to use the word term. The defense wants you to believe that because they didn't get together and say, let's kill Cristina, there's no malice. Unfortunately, that's not the law. That's not what the law is, and that's not what the judge is going to tell you. What the judge is going to tell you is that malice can be inferred from conduct so reckless and wanton as to indicate a depravity of mind and a general disregard for human life.
And renewed objection.
It's not going to be.
Objection's over.
Thank you, Your Honor. It's not going to be the malice that they're trying to say has to exist. That they got together and said, let's kill Cristina. The bottom of this, malice does not require ill will toward the individual. What does it require? Actions and conduct so reckless as to show a disregard for human life. So the question you have here is, they do to show a disregard for human life? And the answer is everything. Everything. You want to know what's relevant about the loaded gun in the back seat? That's a disregard for human life. As the first defense attorney got up here and said, everybody in South Carolina knows you put a child in a car that's in direct sunlight in August and you leave them there, they're going to die. Right. That is a disregard for human life. In fact, it would be actually better and easier if you went through and tried to find a sign at which time they actually showed you some regard for that child's human life. But you won't find any because it's not there. It's not there. Larry's defense attorney came up here and basically said this. Well, just like the solicitor said, he may have thought the air conditioner was on. Right. Because he was high. Because he was high. I don't know what he was thinking. I think if any of us watch this video, the one question that has to pop in your mind over and over and over again, what are you thinking? What are you doing? You put this child in the car, and you know nobody's been in the car. You know it's not on. There's no air conditioning. You're in the middle of summer. You're in South Carolina. Everybody knows you're not supposed to. What are you doing? What are you thinking when you find the child locked in the car at 3 o'clock that afternoon? 4 hours later. Let's don't break the window. Let's go find another key. What are you doing on the swings? What are you doing when you're going inside and having sex and the child is still out in the car cooking? What are you doing? And there's no answer to that. You know why? They're high. And what the judge is also going to tell you is that voluntary intoxication, voluntary use of drugs is not a defense in South Carolina to anything. To anything. If they're high and they think the air conditioning's on, so what? They're high. And by the way, the disregard for the safety of others, the disregard for human life, I'm getting high to begin with. You go in to get your child, to continue to get high, and put the kid in the car while you're high. You can't find a single thing in this anywhere that shows that they cared 1 ounce about that child. Did I say at the very beginning that that child was baggage? The child was baggage on that day. Did some witnesses take the witness stand and say, she's been a good mother in the past? But none of them knew about her nephews. None of them knew how she acted when she was high on meth with Larry. None of them did. They didn't lie to you, they just didn't know. And they said they didn't. And Larry says, okay, I got another defense. Not my child. Never mind, he put the child in the car himself. He wants to pass because it's not his child. He's not responsible for the child. Because he doesn't have any regard for human life, for a child or anybody else's. Supposedly, if I saw something going on with a child, I'd do something about it, would you? What about 3 o'clock in the afternoon? The child's locked in the car. Break the window. That's Larry. What about Rita? They even made a big deal about Brittany Honeycutt. What did Brittany Honeycutt tell you? She said, take this child with you. Please take this child with you. I got to go to work. I can't take the child with me. Take her to work, put her in the car, leave her there. That's what I do. I do it all the time. They said, well, Brittany Honeycutt didn't like her very much, and she didn't like Rita. Okay, fine. Let's go to Lindsay Lewis, the babysitter. The same babysitter that Rita abandons her child with 3 days before this takes place. The babysitter who'd never taken care of the child before. The babysitter who didn't even know that if the child ate solid food, that there was a choking hazard because Rita never told her. The same babysitter that came in and testified there wasn't any food in the house, and she just left. And all Saturday I tried to call her and she didn't respond. You know why she didn't respond? Because she was getting high with Larry. Her focus was on Larry. Her focus was on getting high with Larry. Not anything to do with this child. She didn't respond then. She responded before. She She didn't respond through this entire event, not to that child. All of her concern is Larry. She abandons the child with the babysitter. Then she turns around and puts the child in the car. They don't forget, just like I said in my opening statement. They didn't forget her. They stood around the car until they went inside and had sex. Where was the child? In the car. Just abandoned the child again. Yeah, I own the fact that I said baggage. It's exactly how they're treating that child. Baggage. In the way. Because she needed to be with Larry. And she abandoned the child then. And the child's locked in the car. Does she stay with the child? No. She and Larry go and hug and kiss in the car, in the truck, and they take off. Just abandon the child again. And one more thing, and I'll sit down. Michelle brought up an excellent point. Said he's a parent. Lots of us parents. When she finds that her child is dead, I'm a parent. I can't imagine finding my child dead.
Objection, Your Honor.
Just like Mr. Phillips said.
Speculation is improper. It's not in evidence.
The objection is overruled.
Thank you, Your Honor. Can't imagine. Most parents, they find their child dead. They're not going to be inside the house when the police get there. In fact, the police are going to have to pry that parent off of that child. And if the police don't have to do it, the coroner's going to have to do it. And if the coroner's going to have to do it, the funeral director's going to have to do it. Because the parent is going to stay with that child. That child is dead. The child is a part of them. They're never going to leave that child, even if the child is dead. And what did she do? She went inside. She abandoned the child. Maybe at some point in her life, and maybe on other days, she wouldn't have done that. But on August the 5th, 2019, two people finally met, murdered that child. On this day, they tortured that child.